Howdy, welcome back to the Montana shop. Super excited because today we're launching the latest and greatest build a knife box, the Butcher's Cleaver. All right, let's take a look in the box and see what we got. Right off the bat, we have some roasted curly maple. Might be a little hard to see on camera, but this wood has a lot of curl in it. Super cool, super pretty. When the light hits it, it just has a cool ripple effect to it. So I'm super excited. I've never really used a curly wood before. Used a lot of ironwood that we sell here at Alec Steele Co. Go check it out. But super excited for that handle material. We have 1/4 inch diameter canvas micarta for our pins. We have a 1/4 inch high-speed steel drill bit. And then we have our knife blank. I just wanted to make a quick note that this is 1095 high carbon steel. This is by no means stainless, so if you guys are using it in the kitchen, just make sure that you hand wash and hand dry because it has the potential to rust. And it probably will patina with time, but we'll talk a little bit more about that and care later in the video. All right, so right now, I'm gonna clean this blank up a little bit and then I'm gonna mark out where I want my bevel to be. I'm gonna be using some blue Dykem, our granite block and our height gauge, and I'm gonna mark the center of this blank. You guys can just use some standard calipers to mark the center. And I'm also gonna use that Dykem and these calipers to mark out where I want the top of my bevel line to be. I'm also gonna quickly take this blank to the disc sander because it has a little bit of a rag on there from being plasma cut. So I just wanna clean it up so this thing can set perfectly flat. I got that rag off, so now I'm gonna put some blue Dykem on here and describe where I want my bevel to be. Granite block and height gauges are really nice, but unless you're a machinist, you might not have them. And Kevin said that we should try and do things simple and with basic tools just to kind of help give you guys a good idea of how you can do this in your home shops and your home garages. So I'm just taking a pair of calipers. I've got it pretty close to half the thickness of my material. And I got the lock nut set, and I'm just gonna scribe down it carefully. And then I'm gonna go to the other side and I'm gonna scribe it again. So I have 2 fine scribe lines now. You don't have to set your calipers perfectly to half the thickness of your material. You can just scribe down both sides and then you'll get 2 lines that show you exactly where center is. Simple as that. Time to head to the grinding room. All right, so I'm gonna start with a 36 grit Cubitron, and I'm gonna work my way up to a A100 Trizac before we heat treat. As always, when you're grinding, eyes, ears, respirator, you can get all those, and the VersaFlows at alecsteelco.com. All right, so I'm starting to get a good established bevel right there. The first few passes are always a little weird until you get a good flat established that you can feel on the grinder. So just keep an eye on your center scribe line. Make sure that you're not going past it at all. And make sure that you're slowly bringing this top line up to where you scribed. It's mainly about pressure. I'm pretty close to my center line where I want my edge to be, but I got a ways to go to get my bevel all the way up to my scribe line. So right now I'm putting more pressure towards the spine of the knife versus the edge. And so what that's doing is it's bringing that line further up, but I'm not really removing any material at the edge. So I'm just putting a little bit more pressure towards the spine instead of the edge to bring that back up. Another tip too, I want this top line on my bevel to kind of match the curve of the edge. What I'm having to do is I'm having to rotate the cleaver ever so slightly as I grind it to match the edge. So the other day, I had the idea to download and print off a bunch of data sheets on all the steels that we work with, like a lot of the blade steels and whatnot. And so right here, I have the data sheet for 1095. The austenitizing temperature, or the temperature at which it changes forms to ready to be quenched, is 1450 degrees to 1475 degrees Fahrenheit. I have our trusty dusty Paragon kiln. I got our 1075 heat treating program is the same temperature that 1095 needs to be heat treated. So this thing is gonna ramp up to about 1480, and I'll put the blank in there, and then we're gonna heat treat it in oil. The thing about 1095 is 1095 needs to be cooled fairly rapidly to fully harden. And so we're gonna do that by using Parks 50 Quench oil. If you guys do not have Parks 50 Quench oil, perhaps maybe you have like vegetable or canola oil on hand, like at your home shop or in your garage. What I highly recommend you guys do is that you preheat your oil before heat treating your knife. What it does is, as that oil warms up, it gets thinner and thinner, and it can actually cool off and dissipate heat quicker than if it were cooler and thicker, if that makes any sense. So if you guys are not using Parks 50 Quench oil and you're using some kind of different oil, I highly recommend that you heat it up to about 200 degrees or so. And or go out and buy yourself some Parks 50 Quench oil, whatever works best for you. Not only am I going to heat treat, but I'm also going to do what's called an interrupted quench. So basically, I'm going to take the hot knife out of the kiln. I'm going to quench it in our Parks 50 for 7 to 8 seconds or so. Pull it out. It's still going to be fairly hot. It will have cooled down to the point where the steel has hardened. But while this is still warm, I'm going to come over to our bench here, and I'm going to clamp the knife in between some aluminum plates. And so what that's going to do is, our blade's already heat treated, it's still hot, but by clamping it in between two pieces of aluminum like this, that blade's gonna continue to cool really fast, but then it's also gonna stay perfectly straight because it's clamped between these heavy aluminum plates. And that's a really cool method to use in heat treat to ensure that your knives stay straight and you don't have to worry about warps. All right, so I'm gonna let this kiln get up to temperature. And once it's up to temp, I'm gonna put the knife in there, and then I'm gonna wait for it to come back up to temp and let it soak maybe about 10 minutes or so before I heat treat it. For those of you who are heat treating in a forge, one thing that I would like you to do is I'd like you guys to go on your phone and Google steel temperature color. And what it will come up with are some handy charts that you can use to estimate the temperature of your steel before you heat treat. And so you can use any of these diagrams to assist you in determining if your steel is at the correct temperature for heat treating. All right, our kiln is up to temperature. It's a little over 1480. That's fine. I'm gonna go put this in there now. We'll wait for the kiln to kind of come back to temperature, give it about a 10-minute soak time, then quench, and then take it over to the plates. So, I got some fire bricks in there to kind of help keep this cleaver propped up. You don't want the edge touching the ground or any side of the kiln because it might overheat. So that's why I have those bricks in there. So it's resting on the spine, the edge is up in the atmosphere, not touching anything, so it shouldn't overheat. All right, we're up to temp, here we go. Just like that. So, it doesn't take long at all really for this knife to cool down, especially with this aluminum plate. That conducts a ton of heat away from it really fast. So in only a couple minutes, we'll be able to unclamp it and take it out. Skates the file really nice. I think this thing hardened up just fine. I mean, just sighting down this thing, it looks dead flat. I don't see any warp in there whatsoever. That's what's really nice about doing the interrupted quench with some aluminum plates. It's like, this thing's dead straight. All right, our knife is in there. It's propped up with a couple little pieces of fire brick. So, the nice thing about the Paragon ovens is you can put multiple different programs in there for whatever you're doing. So right now, I got the temper program pulled up. You can see, you can adjust your rate, your temperature, and your hold time. So we're gonna be at 400 degrees for 2 hours. We're gonna drop down to about 200 degrees for just a minute, and then we're gonna go back up to 400 for another 2 hours. And then this knife will be properly tempered. So if you guys are using a conventional oven in your home, set your oven to 400 degrees, whatever that is in Celsius. I'm too lazy to look. Put it in there for 2 hours, take it out, and then put it back in at 400 degrees for another 2 hours. And your knife will be properly tempered. Because right now, the knife, after being heat treated, is super hard, but so hard that it's brittle, and if I were to drop it on the ground right now, it would shatter like glass. And so when we temper it at that 400 degrees, it softens it just enough that it keeps its hardness and its edge retention, but it will not chip or break if it were ever dropped or anything like that. All right, so our blade is heat treated and tempered. What I just did was I took this tang to the torch and heated it up a little bit to kind of soften it up, because we are going to have to drill and ream these holes for our pins. So I wanted to make sure that was plenty soft. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to head into the grinding room. I'm going to hit this tang with the disc sander, make sure all of it is perfectly flat. Now I'm going to be careful to not go further past where my handle is going to be. So I'm just going to disc sand right about around through there. I want to leave this like rough mill scale finish on there, but I'm probably going to hit it on the wire wheel really gently. And then I'm also going to refinish these bevels a little bit, being careful to not overheat the edge. All right, I believe I got this cleaver nice and hand sanded. Took it up to 800 grit, and I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm gonna put some masking tape over that to protect it. And now we're going to use our 1/4 inch drill bit, and we're gonna get our curly roasted maple ready to glue onto the blade. All right, we got one set of scales drilled through. And so the nice thing about this CA glue trick is just like that, we can separate our tang and our handle material. Check that out. We're drilled through. There's a little bit of a burr on the inside of that scale there, and I'm just gonna use this chamfering tool in there. Just lightly ream them. Doesn't have to be much at all. And there, we're gonna sit flat. So, the thing about working with pins is it's not as intuitive as it may seem at times. A 1/4 inch pin might not work with a 1/4 inch drill bit perfectly. Sometimes it can only be a few thou difference between one or the other for them to not really want to go in. And so that's the case that we have right here right now. The hole is just ever so slightly undersized, just by a few thousandths of an inch. And there's a quick and easy fix for that. I'm gonna put this in the truck of the drill, and then I've got some 220 grit right here that I'm gonna wrap around it. And we're just gonna carefully sand the outside of this pin down a little bit so it fits nice and snug. I would rather have the pin be too tight into the hole at first versus the drill bit be oversized or the pin undersized and there's a lot of slop in there, because then you won't ever get a good fit up. We got our handle scales ready to glue up, polished front shoulders. We got our pins cut. We have our knife prepared, a slight hollow in there for a pocket for some epoxy. I've got some spring-loaded clamps handy. And I also got some paper towels and acetone to kind of clean up any spillage from the epoxy. Right now, before I start mixing epoxy though, I'm gonna take that acetone and I'm gonna clean and degrease everything. That kind of helps to take out any little errors in your holes. Sorry. All right, our knife is glued up. I just quickly buzzed off the excess pin and glue that was on there. So now we're ready to head back into the grinding room, finish this handle. I'm gonna grind it to about a 400 grit, hand sand to about 1,000, buff it, sharpen it, and the knife will be done. Except I got something fun planned. This roasted curly maple handle looks fantastic. To get the best results, I suggest hand sanding to 800 grit or even 1000 grit, and then hitting it on the buffing wheel. I like to use the pink compound. The pink compound gets a nice glossy, shiny finish on it that really makes it pop in the light. So next thing, I'm gonna take the tape off. You guys can use stones if that's what you have. There's many different ways to put an edge on a knife. I like to use the work sharp grinder because it's really quick and easy and it gets a good, really refined, polished edge. All right, the cleaver is technically done. It has a good sharp edge on it, sharp enough to shave with. Handle is beautiful, but I wanted to show you guys a little something else in addition with this. I wanted to do something special with this cleaver because it's gonna be used in your guys' kitchen, or it might be like a camp cooking knife, you know? I wanted to try and do a mustard patina. All right, this is the cleaver with just a few minutes worth of mustard on it. Already starting to etch. All right, the cleaver is done. I'm super happy with it. Guys, that mustard patina is super easy to do, creates a really cool effect, and have fun with it. You guys might also want to pick up a can of Axe Wax from the store because it's a food safe protectant for your knife. Be sure to head over to alecsteelco.com. Guys, grab yourself a Cleaver Build-A-Knife box kit and have fun and make a nice, wonderful knife that you can use in the kitchen.